Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. I am your teacher Simin Ahmed. This is my lecture number 25 for grade preo, and today we have a history class. Today we are going to start the new chapter, which is chapter number 7, and chapter number 7 is Khilafat movement. Khilafat movement was a movement started by the Muslims of India after a series of events happened in India. So that was particularly to save the Khalifa in Turkey. As you know that the Lucknow Pact was signed between the Muslims and the Hindus, and that was the first time when the both different communities worked together. The Lucknow Pact showed that the Muslims and Hindus could work together towards a common aim. When the Khilafat movement was formed, it looked like another example of how the two communities could cooperate. But as time went on, it became apparent or clear that religious differences made it impossible for Muslims and Hindus to work together without communal affairs, continually undermining the supposed harmony. So the background was like the Turkey sided with Germany in World War One. As it began to lose the war, concern with expressed in India about the future of Turkey. It was a peak period from 1919 to 1922, casting demonstrations, boycott, and other pressure by the two major communities, the Muslims and the Hindus. Being brothers, the Indian Muslims realized their religious duty to help the Muslim country. It was the extraterritorial attachment based on Islam. Another factor same to the first was that the Indian Muslims considered Ottoman Caliphate a symbol of unity of the Muslim world as Ummah. Khilafat movement 1919 to 1924 was a significant Islamic movement organized by the Ali brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali in India during the British rule. This was an attempt by the Indian Muslim community to unite together in support of the Turkish Empire ruled by the Khalifa Ottoman Sultan, which is Sultanate Osmania, which was attacked by European powers. The main objectives were like the Khilafat movement aimed against the British government, received the support of Mahatma Gandhi, who related his non-cooperation movement with it. Although he was a Hindu, but he supported Muslims community and this in this movement to save the Khalifa. The main objective behind this move was to enlist the support of the Muslim community into his movement, which addressed the issue of Swaraj. Swaraj means self-government, Sava means self, and Raj means rule or government. So that is, he was actually keen to achieve self-government for India. By mid-1920, the Khilafat leaders assured full support to the non-violent methods of Gandhi, which facilitated the establishment of a united front of Hindus and Muslims against the British government. This combined force formed a major threat to the British rule. Different reasons and different events happened in India which led to the formation of the Khilafat movement. So let me explain all the reasons here one by one. This movement was started due to the treatment of Turkey after the First World War. Turkey was a Muslim country and its leader was considered the head of the worldwide Islamic community. His empire included Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. When the British threatened to take their territory away, the Muslims of India were outraged and angered and started the movement to protect their sultan and their religion. So basically, the first one was the deep-seated Muslim fears. It should not be thought, however, that the Khilafat movement sprang solely or rise up exclusively from the British threat to dismember the Turkish Empire. It had its roots in the deep-seated mistrust or distrust of the way the West and Britain in particularly treated Muslim countries. Afghanistan and Persia, which is now Iran, both Muslim countries had been the subject of competition and rivalry between Russia and Britain. Both the two powers had agreed on how Afghanistan and Persia were to be run. but little attention was paid to the views of the native Muslim population or their local population. Some Muslims in India considered that the British policy towards Muslims was to encourage in them a fear of Hindus so that Muslims would cooperate with the British. Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, a prominent leader of Congress, criticized Muslims who had cooperated with the Satans of Europe. Satans of Europe means shaitans of Europe, and told them, "You are fighters for God's battle, and the Hindus who are engaged in a struggle for their country's progress and independence are also winning a jihad." Means they are practicing a jihad. He was a Muslim and he gave his view, his review even about Hindus. Although there were many Muslims in the British Army fighting against Turkey, there were a large number of desertions by soldiers who were unwilling to fight fellow Muslims in Turkey. Desertion means it means the action of illegally leaving the armed forces, like they were illegally leaving the British forces because they were forced to fight against their fellow Muslims in Turkey. Concern about British policy towards Muslims was also shown in 1918 when the president of the Muslim League, Maulvi Fazlul Haq, stated that every instance of a collapse of a Muslim powers of the world is bound to have an adverse influence on the political importance of our community. Like Azad, he called on Muslims to give up their traditional opposition towards Hindus. Another reason was the First World War and Turkey. During the First World War, the Turks had fought on the side of Germans against Britain. This created a serious problem for the British in India because India was under the government of British Empire and British was against the Turkey because Turkey fought the war with Germany against the British. They wanted the Indian Muslims to fight in the war against the Turks. But they knew that Indian Muslims would not take part in any fighting which led to the Khalifa being overthrown or his empire being dismantled. So they knew that Muslims will never fought against their fellow Muslims in Turkey, and they will never want to break up the Khalifa from the Turkey. To solve the problem, the British informed the Indian Muslims that the British would respect the rights of the Khalifa and that the Turkish Empire would be maintained. They also promised that any of the figure of the Islam, like in their religious places, will not be harmed. As a result of this promise, thousands of Muslims joined the British Army. During the war, the British imprisoned some leading Muslims, such as Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar and his brother Maulana Shaukat Ali, to try to prevent opposition within India. However, the strength of Muslim feelings can be seen in a speech made by Maulvi Fazlul Haq in his presidential address to the Muslim League in 1918 when he said, "To me, the future of Islam in India seems to be wrapped in gloom and anxiety." He actually said that the future of Islam seems to be wrapped in a darkness and in the tension and in worriness. Every instance of a collapse, every moment, every event of the collapse of the, or every example or every moment of the fall of the Muslim powers of the world is bound to have an adverse influence on the political importance of our community in India. So at the end of the war, peace treaties or peace agreements were drawn up showing how the defeated nations were to be treated. The defeated nations were Germany and their allied countries like Austria and Turkey. The Treaty of Versailles set out what would happen to Germany. Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919, and that was a document signed by Germany and their allied powers or countries following World War I that officially ended that war. Its armed forces were greatly reduced, its colonies were taken away, and that country was split into two by the creation of a new country, which was Poland. So, this is what happened with Germany. Germany arms was like their forces were reduced and their small territories were taken away by the countries, and the whole country was split into two countries, and the new creation of the new country was Poland. The Germans were also forced to pay a huge sum of victorious allies for their damage caused by the fighting. The victorious allies were the British and their allied countries, who were the victorious allies who won actually the war. So Germans were forced to pay them their to pay their sums of damages that made in their countries. Similar measures were taken against Germany's allied country, which was Austria. These treaties or agreements worried the Muslims in India. In view of the punishments imposed upon Germany and Austria, it was difficult to see how Turkey would be treated any differently. Because Turkey was a Muslim country and we had our Khalifa was there, and some of the very religious places were there. Indeed, the British Prime Minister felt strongly that the Turkish Empire should be split up in the same way that Germany and Austria had seen their empires taken away. The Indian Muslims were angered, outraged at this suggestion, and began to organize opposition to the British plan. The third major reason for the formation of the Khilafat movement was to save the Khalifa. Turkey was a Muslim country and its ruler, the Sultan, was considered to be Khalifa, the head of the worldwide Islamic community. He ruled over an empire which included important religious centers such as Mecca, Jerusalem, which is Baitul Muqaddas, and Medina, and was known as the Khilafat. The Sultan was a figure of immense or great importance in the Muslim world. When the British threatened to take territory away from the Khalifa, Muslims in India were angered and outraged and formed the Khilafat movement to protect the Sultan and their religion. The outrage of Muslims or the anger of the Muslim led to the establishment of the Khilafat movement against the British Empire, in which the All India Khilafat Conference was held in Delhi in 1919 on 23rd November. The All India Khilafat Conference was organized at New Delhi, and later a Khilafat manifesto was published which called upon the British to protect the Khilafat. The leaders of the Khilafat movement joined hands with the Indian National Congress for the upcoming non-cooperation movement. The leading figures at the conference were two brothers, Maulana Shaukat Ali and Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, and senior member of Congress Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. The conference passed a resolution agreeing to send a delegation or a group of members to Britain to make sure that the British were aware of the strength of the Muslim supporters or support for the Khalifa. Mahatma Gandhi, who was a Hindu and was a member of the Congress, was also present at the conference. By the end of the war, he had become an unofficial leader of Congress, and his presence showed that the Khilafat movement was one in which religious differences were much less important than Hindus and Muslims uniting in opposition to the British. Gandhi's influence can be seen in the fact that the conference also passed resolution boycotting British goods and adopting a policy of non-cooperation with the British. Gandhi was a keen advocate or was a strong supporter of the policy of passive resistance. Passive resistance means the non-violent opposition to authority or to the British Empire. He gave his approach the name Satyagraha. Satyagraha was a policy of passive political resistance that was advocated by Gandhi against the British Empire. It was the Satyagraha was a holding on to truth or truth force is a particular form of non-violent resistance or civil resistance. Someone who practices satyagraha is a satyagrahi. The term satyagraha was coined and developed by Mahatma Gandhi, in which he described as meaning not meek submission to the will of the evildoer, but the pitting of one's whole soul against the will of the tyrant. So, passive resistance, he argued, showed strength and moral supremacy over those who resorted to violence. Gandhi recommended the Muslims to join Congress in seeking Swaraj. Swaraj means self rule. Sava means self and Raj means rule. Self rule for India. Most Muslim leaders agreed with the idea of self rule or self government, though Jinnah thought India was not yet ready for it. So the second conference was held in Amritsar in December 1919. At the same time, both Congress and the League were also meeting in this city. It was agreed that all three organizations should work together to oppose plans to dismember the Turkish Empire. It was agreed that Gandhi would take the lead in trying to persuade the British not to punish Turkey as they punished Germany and Austria. This seemed a difficult task. Maulana Muhammad Ali had recently returned from a visit to Britain in which he had impressed upon the British and the importance of solving the British Turkish problem. They had listened politely but were not persuaded by his arguments. On his request that Turkey should get justice, the Prime Minister of Britain replied ratherly sarcastically, means like in criticizingly. He said that Turkey would get justice, Austria has had justice, Germany has had justice, pretty terrible justice. Why should Turkey escape? So that was the reply of British Prime Minister, which further angered the Muslim community. In January 1920, a deputation or a delegation or group of members from the Khilafat movement called on the Viceroy to ask for fairness in the treatment of Turkey. In February, a further delegation was sent to England to try to persuade the Western powers not to treat Turkey in the same way as Germany and Austria. But while the delegation was in England, the terms of the treaty concerning Turkey, the Treaty of Sevres, were announced. The Treaty of Sevres was a treaty that was signed in 1920 between the allies of World War I and the Ottoman Empire. This treaty was extremely harsh. It divided an empire up among the allied forces, the Ottomans' enemies. Like Turkey was important because of its strategic position and the size of its empire. Its territorial losses were like Smyrna from Turkey was given to Greece, Syria from Turkey to mandate status under French control, and Turkey also effectively lost its control of the straits running into the Black Sea. The Turks formally had to accept that many countries of their former empire, such as Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Palestine, were now independent or were under British or French protection. In practice, this was already true, but under the treaty, the Turks had to officially accept this. Turkish land was to be given to Greece so that Turkey's only possession in Europe was a small area around Istanbul, which is nowadays the Turkey is. It was not a successful treaty and Turks were angered by it. Turkish nationalists led by Mustafa Kemal challenged the terms of the treaty by force when they drove the Greeks out of Smyrna. The result was the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which returned Smyrna to Turkey. Some of the land lost in Europe was returned to Turkey, but Turkey never regained control of the Muslim territories in the Middle East. The Arabs who had helped the British in the war gained little. Palestine was also a controversial area and remains a troubled region to the present day. On 22nd June 1920, the Muslims in India sent a message to the Viceroy warning that if the terms of the unfair Treaty of Sevres were imposed on Turkey, then a policy of non cooperation in the country would begin on 1st August. Gandhi began a tour of India to reunite support for the Khilafat cause. Both Hindus and Muslims greeted the non cooperation program with equal enthusiasm, which involved surrendering of titles and resigning from seats in local bodies. So that was the surrendering of titles to the British Empire. They also withdrew children from government schools, these were the British government schools, and they also boycotted the British courts. They refused to volunteer to join the armed forces of British and boycotting foreign goods, the British goods. They also refused to stand their candidates for the elections. There was a development in the Khilafat movement on two occasions. The first one was as a general anti-British protest. These measures helped to turn the Khilafat movement into a great anti-British protest movement. There was a great deal of support across the country, and the British were highly embarrassed when visits of British royal princes were greeted with demonstrations and strikes by the native Indians. For example, when the Prince of Wales visited Bombay in 1921, there was a nationwide strike and demonstrations in Bombay led to anti-British rioting and violent disturbance in which 53 people were killed. The British reacted by introducing a policy of repression involving widespread arrests. By the end of 1921, there were more than 30,000 political prisoners in Indians' jail. The Khilafat movement had attracted Muslims and Hindus alike, and for a short while, communal rivalry was put aside by both Muslim and Hindu communities. The Khilafat movement was further developed with the Hijrat movement. To many Muslims, however, the Khilafat movement was not about opposing the British, it was about protecting and fostering or developing Islam. During the years when the movement was at its strongest, Western dress and hairstyles became less popular, and the idea grew, particularly in the northwest frontier, which is now KPK and Sindh, that disregard of the law of Islam by the British made India a Darul Harb, an enemy territory, or the territory which is haram. So consequently, in August 1920, about 18,000 Muslims set off on a hijrat. Hijrat means migration. They made migration to Afghanistan. They sold their land and property and began the long trek and journey with their few remaining possessions in carts and their wives and children walking beside them. The journey was long and difficult, but the immigrants were told that the Afghan government would welcome them and that the fertile fields would be made available for them to plant their crops, that they would be able to make their lives, to earn their lives. The truth was very different. The Afghans did not welcome the idea of such huge numbers suddenly descending upon their country. The immigrants were refused entry and forcibly sent back to what now is part of Pakistan. When they got back to their villages, more problems awaited them because they sold everything before they were leaving, so they had no jobs and whatever property they owned was in the hands of others. This was damaging to that movement as many supporters lost their enthusiasm to carry on this movement. So I think this is enough for today's lecture. Here is your assignment. You have to do two questions, question number 1 and 2 from page number 74. These are exam type questions. And question number 1 is what was the Hijrat? And this is for 4 marks, so you have to give only the definition of Hijrat movement in a para. And why was the second question is why was the Khilafat movement founded? This is for 7 marks, and this is why question, so you have to give three reasons at least three reasons in three different paras. So do this work in your neat notebook. Thank you so much, dear students, for watching this video. I hope everything will be clear now. If still you have any confusion or any queries, you can drop down your queries in the comment box. I'll definitely entertain all of your queries. Till then, Allah Hafiz.